Do you feel like there are too many games where the protagonist is a straight, rather gruff white male?
This is a very deep question. I think in terms of mainstream advertised game, you would get that kind of impression, but that's the kind of impression you would get of films if all you looked at was the blockbusters. But we all know that whether it's film or games, that there's actually more to it, and I feel that there's not enough publicity beyond the whole, oh, we've got a game that has explosions and shootings and a white guy as a protagonist.
It's a bit of a 50-50 question. I think that most kind of Western games like Call of Duty are kind of just all out action hero males. More kind of Eastern Japanese style games have more female protagonists.
I think that's all the type of games that we hear about. That doesn't mean to say there's too many of them, but I think those AAA games are that. And I think that's because it's for a mass market, and I think it's because the mainstream games industry believes that that's the image that it has to sell and promote. But I think if you dug a bit deeper and you were probably a bit of a hardcore gamer like you two, you would probably be able to give me 1,000 examples for every GTA where it's an opposite representation.
Yes, I do believe there are a lot of games that have mainly white Caucasian males as the main characters. I guess I would say that I'd like to see more of a diverse group of people with some more nationalities in there, so yeah.
What do you think about teenagers and adults playing video games? Like, not just little kids?
Fine.
Okay, what about watching animations, like cartoons?
That's perfectly fine. They're all,
and
like,
reading comics?
They're all mediums that we shouldn't look down on. I don't see why only kids should look at them. Yeah.
I have no problem with it. Usually games these days are sort of aimed towards that kind of age range anyway, 18 and above. A lot of the games today have a lot of violence in it, so yeah, I have no problem with it. Seeing as it's a free country and you can watch what you want, as long as it's age appropriate, I see no reason why nobody can enjoy the things life offers.
I think there's that whole kind of stigma with watching cartoons. I don't really understand when parents say that they're quite childish, but I do think that like with some animations they can kind of take on like mature subjects, but also then things like kind of My Little Pony and the whole like brony culture, that's obviously something to be worried about.
I think it's good. I think we should always encourage people to play, whether that is a Sudoku, whether that is chess, whether that's GTA, whether that's an online game, whatever. It's about logic, it's about strategy, it's about using your brain. I would much rather a child of mine played a game than sat and watched TV, because when you play a game you are active, you are actively engaged with what you are doing, and that is positive.
Okay, so what about animations?
What, watching animations?
Yeah.
Why not? Why not?
And reading comics?
Absolutely. If you can get someone to read anything, whether it is an online story, whether it's a comic book, whether it is some really gorgeous kind of narrative that's spread through social media, it's just a story. It's just, it doesn't matter what the medium is.
Okay. 47% of gamers are female. Do you think mainstream video games show this?
Probably not, I suppose. But it's also quite difficult to define what games are for girls and for guys, because I know like a lot of female gamers, they play a lot of mainstream games. That is quite normal actually, you know, like it's also normal for people to play like things like shooters and stuff, regardless of their gender, no one questions that. But I do think that sometimes in mainstream games their target audience is not very broad. How should I say it? Even though they're trying to go for broad, they're sort of just copying each other, and then it ends up being a whole dude fest.
I think that this is kind of represented good and bad. Obviously we've had quite a few successful titles like New Tomb Raider, Final Fantasy 13 and all of that, but I think we still have a long way to go before we are seen as equal as male characters in video games.
I think the mainstream video games kind of go for and target a male audience, but interestingly I think what is quite interesting is the age of gamers. I think, if I'm right, the predominant age of gamers is the 30s and over. So actually not only is there a gender imbalance, I think there's an age imbalance between what a 30-year-old female would want to play versus what an 18-year-old female might want to play. But I think it's also a bit stereotypical to say that girls want to play with ponies and horses and puppies
or
in
just
games.
Or only Candy Crush.
Yeah, or only I do like Candy Crush, but
like my dad.
But girls also want to be violent.
Puzzle games.
And I think they are very gender stereotyped. I can't think of a mainstream game where the main protagonist is female and she isn't sexualised. I can't really think of one.
I think our current mainstream media shows this by catering a lot more for the female gender, you know, offering, you know, a lot more feminine games as well as female characters within games. For example, Grand Theft Auto, you can be male or you can be female, and there is no actual differences between the two. You both have the same sort of strengths and weaknesses, so basically showing equality within games. And Tomb Raider Lara Croft, one of my favourite games, I must say. Yes, and I very much enjoy playing that game.
Is the current representation of women in mainstream video games good or bad?
I think it's getting better in general, because before it was all just eye candy or thing that gets kidnapped, save them thing.
Okay.
Now it's like, I think how any kind of characters, regardless of gender, represented in video games has a correlation between how well written games are, because games, like especially mainstream games, have gone through like this whole stage where there's just a lot of bad writing because there's not a lot of focus on it. Perhaps that's why people go, oh, games are worse than films because there's less good writing in it, but people don't understand that, you know, games are not only reliant on writing, so that's why a lot of them have really shit writing, but that's still like no excuse.
I would say it's quite good, but quite bad as well. Females in games are quite over-sexualised a lot, and a lot of their bodily parts are shown, breasts and stuff like that, and buttocks, and they're really sort of placed on a pedestal of sexualisation, and that's why they get a lot of male gamers more than female gamers, because it's aimed towards the males more. But you could also argue that it's aimed towards females as well, as males are also over-sexualised.
I think it requires improvement. I think it's a one message representation at the moment, very much like the film industry, and I think it's, if you were looking at Laura Mulvey and all of that kind of way that how you're positioned when you play a game, you're very much through the eyes of a man. And I think that's what needs to change. I think we need diversity and we need to have multiple of voices, not just saying that's wrong, stop it. It needs developing and growing.
Cool.
I think that we are portrayed as kind of just always being damsels in distress, blah blah blah. I think every answer about whether females are portrayed in a good or bad way is always going to be the same. I think, yes, there does need to be a change.